Never did it happen during the entire Cold War. All these years later, Russia's border with NATO is about to double in size. Finland unmoved by threats out of the Kremlin. Same with neighboring Sweden, so concerned with Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine that it's ready to call time on 2 centuries of neutrality. A miserable own goal by the Russian president, or further fodder for the us versus them siege mentality that's the cornerstone these days of a Russia propaganda machine that's gone full throttle. How will Putin react, and how will public opinion continue to follow him or not? At a time when neither side seems willing to negotiate, should the West double down or offer Putin an exit ramp? Ukraine's president has criticized his French counterpart for evoking dialogue with Moscow at a time when momentum seems to be swinging against Russia. We'll ask about Emmanuel Macron's motives and how the likes of France should feel about the rejuvenation of a NATO alliance that not too long ago he'd branded as brain dead. Today in the France 24 debate, it's not what Putin wanted. Joining us from Brussels, Heidi Hautala, Vice President of the European Parliament, member of the Finnish Green Party. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Retired General Jean-Paul Paloméros, former number 2 at NATO Allied Supreme Command. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back as well to former French ambassador to Russia, Jean de Glignasti, research director at the French political science think tank IRIS. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
And from Washington, he was a top Kremlin economic advisor early in Putin's presidency. That was then, this is now. Andrei Ilyanov is senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Good to be with you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, double the size of the border between Russia and NATO, Finland and Sweden. You could say completing the missing piece of the puzzle between Norway and the Baltic states, which of course raises eyebrows over in Moscow. James Mulholland has more.
An end to 2 centuries of neutrality. Sweden on Monday confirmed that it would join Finland in seeking membership of the North Atlantic Alliance.
The government has decided to inform NATO that Sweden wants to become a member of the alliance.
Sweden has cooperated with NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Its modest armed forces number just 50,000, but it boasts the latest technology equipment, backed by a powerful arms industry. With 5 submarines and a fleet of light warships and fighter jets, it maintains control over its large territory that spans from the Arctic Sea to the Baltic, where the island of Gotland is home to a strategic military base. Public opinion in both Sweden and Finland had been firmly against joining NATO prior to the 24th of February, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine pushed their governments in the direction of the alliance. Decisions that, for now, are of no consequence for Moscow, according to Vladimir Putin.
Finland, Sweden, an expansion to these countries does not pose a direct threat to Russia. But the expansion of military infrastructure to these territories will certainly provoke a response.
The Swedish Prime Minister has said she wants no permanent NATO military bases or nuclear weapons on its territory if membership is approved.
Heidi Hautala, how do you interpret it when Vladimir Putin says it's going to provoke our response?
Well, we've heard this many times now, but at the moment his reactions are quite reasoned. But as our President Sauli Niinistö pointed out after a telephone call to inform him about the Finnish decision on Saturday, the President said to Putin that in very clear words that Finland wants to guarantee its own security and that it is not something that is away from anyone else. So I think the situation at the moment is not worrying, and I think it's clear also what President Niinistö told Putin that it was Russia itself that provoked this decision by Finland.
It sounds that Finns aren't too bothered by, I mean, that's a threat we heard from Vladimir Putin, right? And it sounds like they're not too bothered by these threats.
Well, I think everybody is, of course, shocked about this direct attack against a neighboring country, Ukraine, even if we are not a part of the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, in the same way as Ukraine. But let's say that Finland is prepared and Finland is preparing. We know that this, what we call now the grey period, between tabling the application to NATO and the possible acceptance of the decision, then it will be a risky time, but Finland is prepared. It could be cyber attacks, could be violation of airspace, all kinds of information war. But at the moment, it seems that Finland is prepared.
Finland insisting, as you said, that it's not an act of belligerence. We heard the Prime Minister speak in Parliament earlier. Let's take a listen.
In my opinion, the NATO membership is an act of peace. It's about war never returning to Finland. This is our common cause. But it's also fair to note that this process is not yet over. Just as Parliament member Mikkonen said here, this is where the work begins. Or rather, you could say the work continues to ensure that the joining process is as straightforward as possible, to make it smooth and fast.
Smooth and fast, Jean-Paul Paloméros. They are worried about this sort of intermediary period between the time they've applied and the time that they're actually in NATO.
Well, I'm sure there will be an acceleration because NATO has been ready to accept to host Sweden and Finland. When I was the head of the Command Transformation in 2014, we provided Finland and Sweden a status of enhanced partnership, which meant that we were able to work even closer together. And for instance, I organized, by the way, a collective defense exercise for NATO. It was in 2018, where Sweden and Finland were fully involved from the beginning.
Did that happen during the Cold War as well?
Well, perhaps not so much. That was part of the transformation. But I consider, but that could be disputable, that neither Sweden nor Finland were really neutral since they joined the European Union. And they signed the Lisbon Treaty as well, which encompasses a mutual clause for defense. So this is a natural move because Putin is so uncertain, so unprevisible that this is, and the Finnish know very well the Russian. They have fought against the Soviet Union. So I think this is a sensible move by them, and they know exactly what they do, and they will be welcome, obviously.
Jean de Glignès, do you agree, following from the logic of General Paloméros there, that even countries that are still neutral, like Austria or Ireland, because they're members of the EU, in fact, they're not that neutral?
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think so. And I think it's Putin or Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said that from now on, the Russians consider that being member of the EU is totally equivalent to being member of NATO. That is to say that they would oppose any new membership to EU, which was not the case before.
Which bothers the Russian president more? I'll put this actually to Andrei Ilyanov. Is it EU membership or NATO membership that irks the Kremlin more?
None of them. If we really looked into not what he's saying, but he was really thinking, it's clearly that membership in NATO, either of Finland or Sweden, does not bother Putin at all, because Putin knows very well that Sweden and Finland are peaceful countries that never threatens Russia, and they will never threaten Russia. So that is why it will be peaceful border with Finland, immediate neighbor, and with the slightly distant neighbor, Sweden. It will be peaceful border as all borders with all NATO members. There was a single case of military conflict between the former Soviet Union and the current Russia with any NATO countries since the beginning of NATO alliance in 1949. All military conflicts that Russia today or former Soviet Union in the past did have or has right now are with non-NATO members. So that is why Russia is acquiring a very long, 1,300 kilometers long peaceful border with Finland and with another member, Sweden. So it's a win-win for everybody, for Finland, for Sweden, for Russia.
But when Vladimir Putin talks about the expansion of military infrastructures to these territories provoking our response, what does he mean then?
I think we don't need to pay much attention to this statement because, first of all, both countries, Finland and Sweden, are not going to place military bases of other countries or even NATO countries on their territory. They said they're not planning to put nuclear weapons on their territories. So that is why, in purely military terms, we are not expecting any increase of military potential on the territory of those countries. So that is why it's a purely rhetorics, absolutely baseless.
Jean-Luc Lignesty, you heard the Finnish Prime Minister saying this is an act of peace.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but it's true that...
Say that.
No, I wouldn't say that because in any case, it's provocative to Russia at the present moment. I mean, the situation is the same as before the battle, the Russian victory of Poltava. The Baltic Sea start to be a sort of NATO sea, NATO lake even. And besides, I would say that once the Russians said that they would take some military, they threatened to take some military and technical measures. We know what it means regarding Ukraine, for instance. And I would add to finish that the most dangerous period is between the enhanced opportunities when you have a full-fledged cooperation with NATO, as General Palomero said, and the accession to NATO. That's a very dangerous period because you are not protected yet, and you are would-be member, future member of NATO.
Heidi Hattala, do you agree with Andrei Ilinov that if you look beyond the rhetoric, it is win-win for both sides?
Well, I think we cannot trust that President Putin actually will follow his words in the similar deeds. So I think he has lost completely a trust. We don't trust anything that he says, but at the moment it seems let's say, less worrying that it could be. The real dangerous moment when the Finnish mind started to change was in December, when he started to call for the sphere of influence. And then he sort of strongly questioned the sovereignty and right of independent countries like Finland and Sweden to choose its security structures. But of course, I mean, what we have now heard is true, that the Baltic Sea is also a very, let's say, sensitive region after these changes. And while these changes have not been ratified as NATO full membership yet, we know that the island of Gotland is quite a vulnerable place. The Swedes have already increased the capabilities on Gotland. Then we have the demilitarized Åland Islands. And Finland is very attentive of that because it's an autonomous part of Finland. And let's look a little bit more south. We have the Kaliningrad. We have something that worries the Baltic countries and Poland a lot is the so-called Suwałki Passage. If Russia would attempt something there, then it would cut the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, away from land connections to other EU and NATO countries. So, of course, we have to be very cautious. So I wouldn't say that we are in a situation where this is a win to all, but that was the best choice that Finland and Sweden now could do after we realized that Putin is unpredictable, he's aggressive, he doesn't recognize any limits.
doesn't recognize any limits. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about during the Cold War, there was never a direct confrontation, but there were close calls. There was an episode dubbed Whiskey on the Rocks. That's because it was a Whiskey-class Soviet submarine in 1981, identified by NATO as U-137. It became stranded near Sweden's Karlskrona naval base. At first, the Soviets threatened to blow it up if the Swedes approached. Then the Swedish prime minister at the time revealed suspicions that the sub was nuclear armed. And finally, after much haggling, some 10 days later, Swedish tugboats towed the vessel back to international waters. Jean-Paul Palomiros, how volatile is the Baltic Sea?
Well, you have seen this is very contested, but I would say that Finland and Sweden joining NATO will help a lot to provide more consistency in terms of planning for the security and defense of the Baltic Seas and at large of the north of NATO. So that's really a good news. It means that NATO will be even more credible in that domain in the future, which means that it will be able to deter even better any Russian incursion. You have seen that some aircraft went over the border in Sweden, made quite a fuss in Sweden when they discovered that. Being part of the overall air defense, for instance, of NATO, as we see the French aircraft are overflying the Baltic states for the time being. So they are really an extension and improve air defense systems
Speaking of flyovers, what's with we're constantly getting reports all the time of Russia being accused of violating the airspace of NATO members. Why do they do it?
Well, I spent my time when I was a young fighter pilot to make sure that they couldn't, with my colleagues, they will not infringe, they will not enter the NATO, the French airspace. So they are just testing, I would say. And from time to time, we do the same. I mean, not crossing the borders, obviously, but coming close to the borders. And it takes a very short time to go over the border with a fighter jet, and it could happen. So we must be very careful with mishaps that could happen. But the stronger we are, the best air defense system we have, the best maritime surveillance system. The bulk of NATO capabilities are the command and control system, in fact, including the intelligence and the ability to get a proper situation awareness. And with a proper situation awareness, you know or not if you are under attack or if it is just a mishap because they just were as close to the border, but not more than that.
Andrei Ilinov, the Baltics, what do they represent today for Vladimir Putin, especially when you see how close Finland is to St. Petersburg?
I think it's really some kind of probably misunderstanding on part of some participants, because you're always asking me about what Mr. Putin's would be this decision. But I think we need to distinguish very clearly the position of Mr. Putin and position of the Russian people. And Russian people would win from this membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO. And it's exactly what I was saying that it's just a win-win situation for everybody. For Russian people, it is definitely a big victory because this long border that was the place of bloody battles during the Winter War in 1939-1940, because Finland was alone during that time. Now, since Finland will be a member of NATO, the risk of being attacked by Russia is diminishing to zero. Russia under Mr. Putin or under any other leader would never attack Finland as a member of NATO. It means it will be peace for Finland, for Sweden, and for Russia. It means Russian boys will not die in Finland on the Finnish border. Moreover, it will be peace for Baltic countries. Everybody knows that NATO calculations have shown that in the case of attack of Russia on Baltic countries, that part of the NATO alliance is rather undefendable. that all these calculations from NATO Pentagon have shown very clearly. But now, with Sweden and Finland as members of NATO, risk of Russian attack against Baltics is falling to a very low level. So it is a win for Baltic countries. Once again, it is a win for Finland, for Sweden, for Baltic countries, and for Russian people. So that is why it's a victory for everybody. Certainly one person will be upset, and we know that the name of this person is Mr. Putin. Okay, sometimes it happens.
It's just one person who's upset and who stands alone. And by the way, you're saying as Ukraine's army posts pictures of its forces reaching the border north of Kharkiv, the nation scoring a victory of a different sort on Saturday night.
Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. This victory is for every Ukrainian. Slava Ukraini!
Halush Orchestra running away with the Eurovision Song Contest, garnering the sympathy vote in a competition this year where Russia and Belarus were excluded, and Ukraine's president who's vowed to host the competition next year in Mariupol. The group making its way home by land this Monday, delighting travelers and uniformed personnel at the Polish border as they played their winning song. Jean de Glignesti, it's an information war. The fact that Ukraine wins the Eurovision Song Contest, is that a problem?
Well, I think if there is a soft power war, it's obvious that Russia lost it. But the problem of Russia is that President Putin, in fact, speaks to his own people. He doesn't care about the Western countries and whatever. He doesn't care a fig. So it's two different ways to act, but it's true that regarding at least the Western world, Putin lost the soft power war.
Andrei Ilinov, does the Eurovision Song Contest matter?
It's probably a symbolic gesture. It's an important symbolic gesture of solidarity of Europe and of European people, European nations with Ukraine. And it is very important for Ukraine that Ukraine would not feel itself alone, that would feel the support and solidarity of all three loving nations. It's important. But more important will be military support, military aid to Ukraine, because the fate of this war and the fate of Ukraine, independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine depends on supply of military aid to Ukraine. The fate of the country, the fate of thousands and tens of thousands of Ukrainians will depend on how much military aid will be provided to Ukraine. And that is why European contribution to the peace and security in Ukraine, in the whole continent, is critical. And that is why it is very important that all countries of the West, and certainly of Europe, and certainly France, would need to help Ukraine, because Ukraine is defending peace and security of the whole continent.
Is France doing enough, General Paloméros?
I think France is doing what it can do, and there are limits to what is feasible. But obviously, the
anti-tank missiles,
anti-tank air defense, and long-range artillery as well, which is very useful for the Ukrainians. They were missing this kind of capabilities. But obviously, the bulk of the capabilities are provided by the US. You have to see the difference in budget. But I think the European countries are doing their best more and more. So they are fulfilling their duty, from my perspective.
Heidi Hautala, your thoughts on this matter? How all in does the West go in terms of helping Ukraine militarily at this point?
Well, I think several countries have completely done a U-turn in their policies on exporting weapons to a country that is in war. Germany has been mentioned. They have been heavily criticized, but it was a real turn. Finland as well, in its own way. But I would agree with Andrei Ilarionov that it is vital that Ukraine continues to get the military support, because if Putin will win this war, he will not stop there. And we can see already that his eyes are on Moldova and perhaps beyond. So it's crucial, and we need patience, because perhaps this conflict is a longer one. It might not lead to peace negotiations next month. So we need endurance and patience and continued solidarity to Ukraine. That's clear.
Heidi Hautala, is it strange for you to be on television advocating military support? You come from the Green Party. This is a party whose roots were what, in the 1980s, in an anti-militarist stance.
Well, but you don't know that my father was the youngest colonel in the Finnish Defence Forces in 1944 after the battles. So I'm very acquainted with military in my family.
But more generally, is it a?
No.
Are you surprised at how things have evolved in your country, in Germany, for instance, as well, with the Greens?
Yeah, but I mean, for us, even the Green Party, this has been a real sort of, let's say, proof that Finland should not be alone facing a neighbor that is unpredictable. So. Maybe there are some real pacifists and, people who participated in the peace movements, but this is quite we also have the conscription army, which means that most young people choose the army still. So it's nothing alien, but true that many people around myself, they say that they couldn't believe that they would turn to become NATO supporters. But now everything is a bit different after the 24th of February.
24th of February, changing a lot. There has been, at the same time, those who want to keep the dialogue open. France flat out denying a claim that was leveled at the end of last week by Ukraine's president in an interview with Italian broadcaster La Rai. Volodymyr Zelensky asserted that Emmanuel Macron was, quote, looking in vain for a way out for Russia, when Macron, in his speech to the European Parliament 1 week ago, said Europe must never give in to the temptation of humiliation nor the spirit of revenge. He also mentioned in that speech to Jean de Grigny-Esti how at the end we're going to have to sit down with both sides.
Yes, we'll have
Your
to.
thoughts on Zelensky, what Zelensky said?
Well, everybody plays its own role. The Americans want to tear off the Russian army so as to not to renew such an adventure. The Ukrainian president wants the maximum of support and is struggling for his life and the life of his country. And France and Germany, I must add, need to see the future and to keep some channel of negotiation with.
Was that the wrong time to say that, though? Was it the wrong time to say we're going to have to dialogue with Russia? Because people interpret that as we're going to have to dialogue with, even though he didn't use those words, with Vladimir Putin once it's all.
Yes, I don't. There is no wrong time to say that. I mean, there is a moment when you have to sit down and negotiate. And by the way, 1 month ago, at the end, well, a bit more than that, but at the end of March, we had almost an agreement between the Russians and the Ukrainian. So
really,
now
we almost had an agreement. Are you sure?
But they were disavowed by their own authority. But on the table, we were close to an agreement. And Medinsky, the head of the negotiation, was accused of compromising too much, and the same as Arkamia, the head of the Ukrainian delegation. So it went down, of course, but we know that it's possible, and that was a month ago. So now there is no channel. Everything is, the negotiation is closed, it's deadlock, complete.
Hence the question: when the negotiations are off, when neither side wants to bargain, was that the right moment for Emmanuel Macron to be telling Europe that we're all going to have to sit around the table?
Well, this is true. We are not at war against Russia. The center of gravity of the question is Mr. Putin himself, as it was already stated. So we have to try something. Only those who try can succeed. So we cannot compromise, for sure. We have to support Ukraine as best as we can, delivering weapons, and in any way, even in a term of economy, in term of food supply and this sort of things, because Putin is really starving Ukraine. He tries, at least. He's destroying his economy, his industry, its industry. So it's really the time. But nevertheless, I mean, diplomacy has a role to play, and only those who try succeed. So why not? No compromise. No compromise.
Andrei Ilinov, you agree?
I would agree that negotiations are possible. It's true. But it's also necessary to look into what particular issues should be discussed at those negotiations. And it seems to me there is an international consensus that there should be at least 3 basic issues at those negotiations. The first one is immediate ceasefire from the Russian forces. Second, full withdrawal of Russian troops from all occupied Ukrainian territories, including Crimea and Donbass. Restoration of internationally recognized Russian-Ukrainian border as it was before year 2014, and reparations paid by Russians to Ukraine for all damages that have been done by Russian troops on Ukrainian territories, and to those people who have been killed and murdered and tortured on the Ukrainian territories. If those 3 issues will be discussed by Putin or his representative, it's okay to have such negotiations. All other negotiations concerning destruction of Ukrainian sovereignty or independence or so-called denazification or demilitarization is non-starter.
So to get to that point, though, it means you have to bring Russia to the point where they're ready to bargain away Crimea, which they grabbed back in 2014, it means taking them on militarily first, Andrei.
No, but seems to me the United Nations Charter of 1945 clearly states that all members of United Nations do respect internationally recognized borders. Helsinki Act actually concluded in the capital of Finland that we're discussing today in 1935 reiterated this very important principle of international law, that all territories of all sovereign countries should be respected. All international pieces of international law signed by Russia, including signed by Mr. Putin himself, including document of formation of Commonwealth of Independent States, or bilateral treaty between Russia and Ukraine, all of them stated exactly that. Full respect of territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty of Ukraine. So that is why the issue of Donbass and Crimea and Sebastopol are not debatable. They belong to Ukraine. Nobody else has any legal right on that territory. So that is why it's better for Mr. Putin, the sooner the better, to withdraw Russian troops from all these Ukrainian territories and restore internationally recognized border between 2 countries.
Heidi Hautala, is such a negotiation possible as long as Vladimir Putin is president?
Well, I of course would warmly support the list that Andrei Ilinov has put forward. But to come to that point, I think we have to be much more consistent with the economic sanctions. And in the European Parliament, we are discussing all the time how to convince the member states really to stop importing energy and paying for energy to Russia, which keep up the war machine. So there are many things that need to be done. And I think the Western leaders should tell Mr. Putin that one day he will be made accountable on these terrible atrocities and war crimes that he is complicit and guilty of. So before any peace negotiations, I think we still continue to support Ukraine and increase the sanctions. I hope that Mr. Orban, the president of Hungary, will give up his resistance to this 6th package of sanctions. And it's very much about energy, as you know. Do
you see a way for Prime Minister Orban to come to terms where he can wean himself off of Russian oil. He gets his oil by pipeline from Russia.
Yes, I think he also should be interested in the unity of the EU countries, because the EU has already shown some unprecedented unity and success in making these common decisions. And now Mr. Orban is violating that kind of unity, and he should be also, he is told permanently that this is very much in breach of his loyalty to other EU member states.
Jean Guignesti, last week, did we reach the limits of that EU unity with, as Heidi Hautala was saying, Hungary so far,
well,
refusing to sign on to that sixth wave of sanctions?
Usually EU takes some time to reach an unanimous decision. Hungary is defending its own interest, and everybody tries to minimize the harm done to its own country with such a lack of sanctions. So most probably we'll find a solution which would allow Hungary to find some other ways to provide oil and gas to its own country.
So there'll be some kind of a bargain.
Yes.
In the same way, General Palomiros, we heard last Friday the Turkish president hint, without saying it, that he might veto the Swedish and Finnish applications for NATO membership, calling Sweden in particular a hostel or a guest house, excuse me, those were the words, a guest house for Kurdish insurgents. Is that also part of a grand bargain to say, for instance, they've had their eyes...
I mean, I can tell you, I've been working
what does Turkey want?
around the table, that the Turkish are very tough player around the table of NATO. So they know what they want, and they are really bargaining. They are using that. Is
it up to the United States to give them? They want. I know F-11 or F-35 warplanes,
for instance. Yeah, and to push a little bit, this question of PKK, etc. But at the end of the day, and I think they have made already a statement that they will not block. It's done by a foreign minister or ambassador. So at the end of the day, they will realize that the unity of the alliance is even more important than anything else. But they are trying. You have seen the Croat president as well saying, well, if you don't solve the problem in Bosnia, which is real, I could veto, but they won't. They just use the visibility of this moment to put forward some points. But at the end of the day, I'm sure the alliance will keep united on this point.
Jean-Paul Palomiros, you said earlier how when it comes to supplying Ukraine with weapons, a lot depends on the United States. With NATO gaining new members, the U.S.'s role in Europe is growing. Is that what EU countries want?
I mean, the EU are facing their own responsibility. And when Sweden and Finland join NATO, that will make 23 countries, EU countries, within the 32 NATO members. That's a large majority. So more than ever, the Europeans are facing their own future, and they have to take that in full in their arms to make sure that they fulfill their part of the duty. They are sharing the burden for real. What the Americans are asking for years and years. The first was General Eisenhower. It's a long time ago. So now I think that more than ever the Europeans are facing their own fate, and they have to take that very seriously, to make sure that they do the job as it is written in the Article 3 of the Washington Treaty.
Seen from Washington, Andrei Ilinov, do you get a sense that Europe's role when it comes to defense is evolving?
Yes, definitely. There is very clear signs of very substantial shifts in attitudes in many European countries to the burning issues of today's. And as already have been mentioned, the changes in policies, first of all, in Finland and Sweden that we're discussing right now, in Germany and some other countries. We need to keep in mind the most important goals for all Europe is to restore peace, security, and international law on the European continent. And those goals can be achieved only if Ukraine will be able to resist this vicious aggression, will be able to defend its independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity. This is some kind of the basis for restoration of the most important goals for Europe. And Europe today needs to help Ukraine and itself to achieve those goals with military aid, with solidarity, with sanctions, with all possible ways that peace, security, and international law would be restored in Europe and the rest of the world.
Well, let me ask you as an economist, because this Monday we've had news that McDonald's is selling its remaining business in Russia. The French car manufacturer Renault, its Avotage factories are being effectively nationalized. Is this just a blip and it will be business as usual again once all this is over? Or are we witnessing a further drifting apart between Russia and the rest of Europe?
It seems to be this is evolving international consensus that it is absolutely impossible to continue business as usual with Russia as long as Mr. Putin continues to be the head of the country. What will happen after Mr. Putin goes, we don't know, because it depends who exactly will be in his place and what kind of policy will be pursued by another government or another regime in Russia. But it is absolutely clear that nobody can trust this person, nobody can rely on his position, person who violated all international laws and all international norms that we could think of. And not only international law, but also basis of human morale and ethics that exist either between people or between nations. Though that is why it is absolutely understandable that all remaining international companies and foreign companies that still operating in Russia are leaving the country and will not come back until the basic requirements for restoration of business in Russia will be achieved. And that can be done only after Putin, without Putin.
We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're running short on time. There's much more to talk about. I want to thank you, Andrei Elenov, for joining us from Washington. I want to thank as well Heidi Hautala for being with us from Brussels. Jean-Paul Palomiros, Jean de Glignasti. We want to thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.